Okay, so let's take our graph and we're going to go back in. We're going to find the A, the B, the C, and the D. And then we have to, once we find all those, we have to decide if in fact this thing has been reflected or not. Now, when you are given a graph, they may ask you to write an equation based on the sine function or based on the cosine function. Okay? We're going to work this one through for the sine, and then I'm going to have you go back and write it for the cosine. Okay? So we're going to start off with our amplitude. Remember, we find amplitude by finding the difference of our max and our min. So let's look at that first. Where is our max point right now? It's at 1. And where is our min at right now? -5. So if we come down here and we do the 1 minus the -5, that would give us a 6. And then when we divide that by 2, we would get a 3. So we have an amplitude of 3. You notice they do have it in the absolute value because we don't know yet if we have done a reflection. All right. Now we're going to find our vertical shift, which is our D. We are going to use our max and min for this one as well. But instead of taking the difference, we're going to add them and then divide by 2. All right, so we have those already. So this time we're going to add them. So we're going to do 1 plus the -5, which would be what? 1 plus -5 is -4, and then divide that by 2, and we get a -2. Now, this -2 is important. Now what I want you to do is I want you to go up to your graph, and I want you to put in the line y equals -2. Go in there and put that in for me, because that's going to come up here again in a second. We're going to use that to help us find our phase shift. All right, so we've got 2. So we've got our A and we've got our D. So this was our D, so I'll kind of circle it. Now we're going to look at the period. Okay? The way we find our period is we find either 2 consecutive max, or 2 consecutive mins. And we're going to find the distance between them. So when we're looking at this, I can see up here, I'm going to erase those real quick. I have a max here, and I'm peaking again over here. So this first peak, what does it correspond to on the axis? 3 pi. And my second peak corresponds to what on the axis? 11 pi. Okay. So we see here that we have one cycle. What does that cycle look like? Does that look like the sine or cosine? Now it kind of looks like the cosine, right? But does it matter? No, because sine and cosine share the same period, right? So it's okay. All right, so let's do that. So I'm going to take my 11 pi. I'm going to subtract the 3 pi. And what does that leave me with? 8 pi. That's my period, right? So now, using that, I'm going to find my B. Remember, our B is our 2 pi divided by the period. Okay? So 2 pi, what is our period?
8 pi.
8 pi. So what is our B? 1/4. Okay? So there's our B. So that one requires a little bit extra work just because we do a little extra work when we're finding the actual period itself. So we kind of have an extra step on that. Now that leads us to our horizontal shift. That leads us now to our horizontal shift. All right. So that means we are taking this, we're horizontally shifting this thing. Okay. We are working with the x minus c. So we're looking to see how far this thing shifted to the right. How far this thing shifted to the right. This is where the sine and cosine differ. All right. Or I'm sorry, I'm ahead of myself. Scratch that. Okay, your horizontal shift for your sine is going to be determined by finding the x-coordinate of a point of intersection on your graph and your line of y equals, in this case, -2, which is why I had you guys draw that in. So I want you to look at your graph, and I want you to look at that line of y equals -2. At what point do they intersect? What's the first point that they intersect? At pi. Yes. That point that they intersect right here is that pi. Okay. So that gives you your value of c. Put that over here. So our c is pi. We're having a shift of pi. Okay, now we need to decide if we have reflected this thing. Now we're going to decide if we have reflected this thing. We shifted how far to the right? We shifted to the right by pi. Okay? So now what we're going to look for, this is a sine function, right? On your parent sine function, we start at 0, and then that first number that we hit for the parent is the 1, right? Which is the max. Okay? So we're going to look over here. Here's our pi. Do we hit a maximum or a minimum? A maximum. We hit a maximum. So is this reflected or is this the normal parent? Does this look like your normal parent or does it look like it's reflected? If you're considering this, think of this now as the y-axis. Think of this now as the y-axis. Does this look like our sine function? Yes. Okay? Right, because when you start at 0, your first max on your sine, your next point is the max, right? It goes up, where cosine doesn't do that, right? Cosine goes down. So if we look at this as the y-axis, we can see, can you see your sine function working? Can you see it? So this has not been reflected, so no reflection. So this tells us no reflection. Okay, so now we put everything together. Okay. So now I have y equals, my a we found to be a 3. It is a positive 3, right? Because we have no reflection. 3 times our sine, we found our b to be a 1/4. And we found our phase shift to be a pi, so x minus pi. And the last thing, our d, we shifted what? Down to or -2. And there it is. Okay? So you found all of that information given your graph. All right? So we talked earlier, we did our comparing and contrasting with our sine and cosine. Okay? So you have actually found everything for the cosine except what? What's that difference? That difference is where they start, right? So look up here in your little box. And you're going to do this yourself. For the cosine, a horizontal shift c can be determined by finding the distance a maximum or minimum point has been shifted from the y-axis. Okay, so I want you to take a look at that. Okay, so now if we're going to do the cosine, we're going to look at our graph. We're going to find where the first extreme point, max or min, hits. In this case, it is the what?
3 pi.
It is the max. It's that max hitting at 3 pi. So that means we took our cosine, didn't we? You see him? I'll highlight him. We took that cosine and we shifted him to the right by how much again? 3 pi. Right here, the 3 pi. So let's rewrite this now. Now we're going to rewrite it as a cosine equation. Now let's rewrite this as a cosine equation. So I'm going to have y equals, what's my amplitude? 3, but this time it's cosine. What's my b? 1/4. X minus 3 pi. Good. Do I have anything behind that? Are we done with that one? No, minus 2. And there's your cosine. You did it. Okay?